Okay, we're live on YouTube now. All right.
Okay, I'm gonna admit them all.
Okay, go ahead.
I have seen the torch of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dreams some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings we have known, I will honor her forever. America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. May freedom reign across America, my home. My
All right, welcome everybody. We're still letting people in here. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as we let people in. That was Dr. Simon's song that he and his wife composed, and I hope you enjoyed that. A few preliminary things. This is live on YouTube, and it's being recorded, and it's going to be turned into a podcast, both audio and video version. So keep yourself muted during the program. We're going to have time to have discussion and questions and answers after we have I interview Dr. Simon. And so that's basically it. But when you do ask your questions, it would be great if you want to you put your camera on so that we can see you, because it's going to be a video copy show produced out of it as well. And we'd love to see your beautiful faces. But for the time being, keep yourself muted while we go through this. So, all right. All right, are we ready to start here? Keep admitting people. They're still coming in here. Thank you, Denise. We are doing that. So. Okay. All right. All right, so I'll just go ahead and start. So just keep admitting people, the other Denise, and I'll go ahead and we'll get started here. All right, so welcome to the Truth and Democracy Coalition's monthly meeting. My name is Rich Procida. I'm the founder of the Truth and Democracy Coalition and the host of the Truth and Democracy podcast. Today, we bring you psychologist Dr. George Simon to tell us how to recognize character disturbance in politicians and leaders, and perhaps even in ourselves. But before we begin, I want to tell you a little bit about the Truth and Democracy Coalition and about our upcoming events. The Truth and Democracy Coalition was formed to build a pro-democracy movement in America. We educate the public about disinformation, teach people to be critical of the propaganda they consume, and provide critical analysis of current events and social issues. We produce media and educational materials, hold seminars and meetings, work with other organizations, and organize events and activities geared toward building a pro-democracy movement in America. The coalition seeks to build communities of people of different faiths and ideologies to defend and promote democracy locally, nationally, and globally. And next month, on April 16th at 2 p.m. Pacific time, I will be speaking with diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist Sandhya Jha about whether America is a racist nation. Ms. Jha is an anti-oppression consultant who helps organizations get diversity, equity, and inclusion teams off the ground. Sandhya is an ordained minister and with a master's in public policy, the founder and former executive director of the Oakland Peace Center, and the author of Rebels, Despots, and Saints, the ancestors who free us and the ancestors we need to free. So to register for that, go to tinyurl.com/America Not Racism. And in May, and we haven't finalized the date or the time, but we're going to have Harvard-educated American moral philosopher, cultural commentator, and essayist, Professor Susan Neiman, come talk to us about her new book, Left is Not Woke. And we'll be providing more information about that to you. So everybody's going to be on the email list. So, and you'll get all that information. So make sure to register for that. Now let's turn to the day's discussion. You know, I believe that we have an epidemic of narcissism in America. Our collective narcissism often leads to the election of narcissistic and character disturbed candidates. Like newly elected Congressman George Santos, for example, is a habitual liar. The people who elected him are now calling for him to resign. Donald Trump repeatedly lied about the election, and Republican leaders parroted those lies for nearly a year, and many are still doing so. Many Arizona Democrats feel that Senator Kristen Sinema turned against them in what feels more like a political murder-suicide than an attempt to get reelected. And the question is, why did she do that? And politicians are notorious for telling lies and weaving together half-true and divisive narratives in order to gain notoriety, raise money, and win elections. There are two main reasons people get into politics and political activism. The first is to make a positive difference in the world, whatever that person believes that to be. The second is to benefit themselves. And I got that from Adam Schiff, who said that.
Yes.
Most politicians have some combination of both, but some are primarily in it for themselves. Whether it's aggrandizement, power, or money, how do we distinguish between those who are ill-motivated and those with more altruistic characteristics? Dr. George Simon is an internationally recognized authority on narcissism and other disturbances of personality and character. He has appeared on CNN, MSNBC, HBO, CBS, and Fox News as the author of bestsellers, The Judas Syndrome and Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, and also In Sheep's Clothing. He is also the principal author of How Did We End Up Here? And Essentials for the Journey, Embracing and Living the 10 Commandments of Character, Proven Principles for a Psychologically Healthy and Rich Spiritual Life. And his groundbreaking book, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, was the first to describe covert manipulative personalities and introduce the concept currently known as gaslighting. It has been published in over 25 languages and countries, and he's also the principal composer of the patriotic anthem, America, My Home. We still have people coming in here. Okay. So, welcome, Dr. Simon.
Thank you, Rich. Glad to be with you today.
Yeah, I'm going to need to look at my, okay, so some people on the left view patriotism negatively, but I believe that we must be positive about our country and who we are as people, and that patriotism helps us to focus our ideals and to bring people together around shared values. So I'm wondering what motivated you to compose the patriotic anthem that we just heard, America, My Home.
Yes, that tune literally haunted me for a few years before I ever put it down. And frankly, because I'm not technically trained musically, I never thought I'd do such a thing. But it would not leave me alone. And later on, we would learn the purpose of it. But what the inspiration was my growing realization about the interdependence between freedom and character. And whatever else you want to say about this land of ours, we have had the blessings, we have enjoyed the blessings of perhaps more freedom than many folks enjoy in the world today. But there's an interrelationship between freedom and character. The premise is very simple. If you give people who already have a solid internal moral compass, basically decent people, if you allow them to just live their lives without too much micromanagement and government oppression or any other kind of oppression, such people will not only prosper themselves, but they'll help others prosper as well. And that's how you build a truly prosperous country. But whenever there are too many folks among us of poor character or disturbed or disordered character, there's always the tendency to micromanage people who won't manage themselves very well. Through oppressive rules, laws, and restrictions, And that impinges on everybody's freedom. So John Adams had that right. You just can't have one without the other. The survival of our freedom depends upon character. And sadly, we've forgotten that. We've forgotten how crucial character is to everything that we hold dear. We no longer expect it. We become horribly used to the worst displays of it. It takes more and more to outrage us. And we have forgotten the most essential standards and institutions and things that were once part of our country that helped forge good character. Instead, as those things have become corrupted, we have an increase of what my books call character disturbance. And it truly is the phenomenon of our age. And politics is no stranger, sadly.
So, tell us about yourself. How did you come to this work? What led you to focus on character disturbance?
And that's what everybody wants to know. And it really was twofold. I'm a therapist by training. I'm a psychologist, clinical psychologist, and I saw two different groups of people in my practice. The first group of folks were aggrieved parties who had been in troubled relationships with people of character disturbance of some kind. We didn't even use that label back then. But these were basically decent folks. And in the classical jargon, these overly conscientious folks riddled with anxieties and fears and unresolved inner conflicts. We unfortunately over the years used the label neurotic to describe these folks. And dealing with them and helping them understand the sources of their pain and overcome some of their hardships and realizing what they were dealing with in their relationships and empowering them. That work is what most of us were trained to do in the helping professions. And so I was seeing those folks, to be sure, and they were describing to me this syndrome that we now call gaslighting, this kind of making you feel crazy feeling that so many folks in relationships with folks who knew how to look good without being good. Mm-hmm. See, there's a skill set to charm, even to charisma, to interpersonal relating skills. There's a skill set there. But just having that skill set doesn't make somebody a good person. Mm-hmm. It can make them an attractive person in a whole lot of ways. And many times people in troubled relationships were attracted to that very skill set. And not the least of which is the fact that people of troubled character can actually recognize something of great value in you. They can see you as a person of great worth and value. And to steal your heart, so to speak, is a real trophy for them. But that does not mean that they have the capacity to truly love you. As a matter of fact, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have the capacity to truly love at all. But folks don't learn that until late in the relationship, after their heart has been broken any number of times, and after they've, paid many prices and suffered a lot. So I was seeing folks describe that syndrome, and then I was also seeing these folks who were so arrested in their character development. It wasn't that they were hurting people. It wasn't that they were scared people or troubled people. They were entitled people, spoiled people, causing all kinds of problems and wreaking all kinds of havoc in their relationships without compunction, without really any concern for the impact of their actions or who might be getting hurt in the process. And what I realized very quickly is that all of what most of us had been taught about helping people change, all those rules did not apply for these folks. So many folks think that there's absolutely no help for such folks. Actually, in some cases, there is quite a bit of help available, but it's not the traditional kind of help. That's what I've done workshops for years on, and why I've written several of my books. So I was seeing those two groups of people, and it really clued me into the phenomenon of our age. We're not living in the times that Sigmund Freud and some of the other great analysts and psychological theorists lived in, where people were just so riddled with fears and insecurities that they were making themselves sick. We live in an age where we have people making everybody else sick with heartache and worry and concern and disgust because of their infantile behavior. They haven't grown up morally and in character. So, and I see some folks in the chat saying maybe my volume needs to be a little bit higher. Can we fix that?
I don't know. Do you have, I can't do it, but maybe, I guess you could speak louder.
Okay, I'll do my best.
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
One of the things that from reading your book, which I've been reading, Character Disturbance, we tend to think, us on the left, we tend to think that everybody, if it's the system, if we just corrected the system, everybody would be happy, all our problems would be solved, that people are essentially the same, that they all want love, they all want care, and all of that. But that's not the case, is it?
And there is an interrelationship between culture and character. They're inextricably connected. As more and more character-arrested people populate the society, the normal social institutions, even institutions primarily designed to foster character, they become corrupted. They start to break down. And as they break down, more and more character-impaired people populate the society. It's a classic vicious cycle, and it's been going on for decades now. And it's finally getting our attention because of how serious the problem has become. I'll just give you one character fostering institution. You know, when I was in high school, I played some sports. Sports was an opportunity and a mechanism by which we brutes that are men could learn how to channel our energies, how to regulate ourselves, how to care about more than our own sweet self, how to build something together. It was a way to develop character. And the rewards didn't have to do with multi-millions of dollars. The rewards had to do with the leadership that we acquired for ourselves, the good that we brought to other people. Those were the rewards. And even in professional sports, that was true for decades. Then something happened, slowly, insidiously, incrementally over time. So we barely noticed it until we're in the place where we are now, you know, where people get hundreds of millions of dollars in advance just for showing up. And by the way, just because they have proven to have the talent and not necessarily because they have proven themselves to be a decent person. Mm-hmm. So it's not surprised that all of our institutions, especially our politics, has become even more corrupted than ever. It's not a surprise. And it's not a surprise that it is having multiplicative effect. We have to reclaim the importance of character. I just can't say it enough. And we have to remember what it takes to forge it. Human beings take longer to socialize than any other creatures on the planet. Hour by hour, day by day, 24 hours a day for years to develop even a modicum of human decency. It takes all that. We've forgotten that. We have too much and we've taken too much for granted, and it's unsustainable.
Wow. Wow. So what is character disturbance? Are there different types or different degrees? What are the parameters?
Yeah. Well, narcissism is the topic du jour today. And it wasn't that long ago, actually. It was just a few years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, that the official crafters of the official diagnostic manual that psychologists and psychiatrists and other mental health professionals use, they were thinking of actually getting rid of the classification because it was so hard to define, and because they weren't even sure that the condition existed. And there was just a public outcry like crazy, because anybody that's anybody that's dealt with a narcissistic individual knows, especially a certain kind of narcissist. But character disturbance is just this. Character is that aspect of our personalities that reflects how well grounded we are in moral principles, not just moral principles, but principles of integrity, time-tested principles that help us truly love in this world, wish well for one another, wish well for ourselves. And this is what makes the world prosper. It all depends on that capacity. So character is that aspect of our personality that reflects how well we develop the capacity to really not just care about each other, but do well by one another. And everybody wins. That's the greatest win-win. We win when we're better people, and everybody else wins too. And character disturbance is an arrest of that process. And in our day and time, it's understandable why so many people are arrested in their character development, because we've forgotten what it takes. We've forgotten how much energy we turn our kids over to be raised by TikTok, for crying out loud. We've just forgotten what kind of energy and attention it takes to help forge some decency in us. The lessons that we have to learn, the things that we have to embrace and take to heart. That's why I wrote my latest book, Essentials for the Journey. My life is in that work.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I think we just assume it's going to come naturally.
Right.
I feel that had I known about narcissism, I'm seeing now that I'm learning about, I'm seeing it everywhere. And I feel like I would have recognized some of the abuse I suffered, but at the same time, am I being too judgmental of people?
Yeah.
I feel like I've become a narcissist magnet in some way.
Well, because there's so much narcissism, you can't help but see it these days. But as I say in my books, character disturbance varies as the type and degree. It is a spectrum phenomenon, much like we now know about the developmental disorders like autism. There's a very wide spectrum of both type and degree. Some narcissists, frankly, are very benign. Some folks are probably not going to severely hurt you in a relationship, but that doesn't mean that they aren't self-serving, and that doesn't mean that they really care for you as much as it seems that they do. But some narcissists are relatively benign. Some, the more malignantly narcissistic individual, really not only doesn't care about you, but sometimes cannot care about you. They can't care about anything except their own sweet agenda. And when we hand, I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but when we hand somebody like that the reins of power, we deserve exactly what we get.
Yeah, and I'm
Earned that.
so that seems to be an important issue. How do we recognize character disturbance in others? Oftentimes narcissists and the like attempt to hide their character flaws, or they come off as charming. How do we recognize it when we see it? Are there signs to look for so that we don't put these people into office?
Yeah, boy, that is the question of the day. And you're right. Sometimes that what we call the charm alarm does not go off. We don't think automatically that this charm and this what appears to be interest shown, we don't think that it could be necessarily a self-serving thing. We're bowled over by it. We want to believe so desperately that they really care about us. But the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the track record almost all the time. And folks don't generally look carefully enough. That happens in relationships too. People will buy right off the bat the story about why the last 3 marriages failed, without digging just a little deeper. Maybe, just maybe, you had a hand in that. I guess, maybe. And I wonder what it was about you that sent everything south. So we don't vet carefully enough, and we don't also know what to look for. One thing we really need to do a better job on is this whole thing of lying. It is an epidemic. And one of the reasons why we failed to consider it is because it's so rampant, it doesn't shock us anymore. I mean, for a minute, we were really outraged with Santos because we seemed to have a new level of lying, just bold-faced, horrendous lying, just making stuff up and having no compunction in interviews saying, well, I got away with it, so I might as well do it again. We're not even outraged by that or shocked by it. Where are the protests in the streets? Where are the recall campaigns? We are so desensitized to character dysfunction. We're used to it in our relationships. We're used to it in our leaders. We're used to it too much. And it has to turn around. Now, how will it turn around? It will turn around one heart at a time, starting with our own. We can be one less problem. We can be the one person who doesn't support or endorse bad character, either in ourselves or in the folks that we choose to represent us. Lincoln said it better than me. He challenged that old notion by Lord Darfur Acton, who said that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
He, in keeping his enemies close at hand, said, if you want to test a man's character, give him some power and then observe what he does with it. That will tell you all you need to know about the character of the person.
Well, we developed our system, and the founders focused on people pursuing their interest, but and they sort of assumed that they couldn't get people to pursue the common good. And yet that is the basis, from reading your book, that is a very important thing for people to do and to become.
Yeah. But it takes maturity of character to appreciate that fact. That's my point. We have forgotten all that it takes to forge character in a human being. We are not natural good people. We are brutes. We are self-serving, selfish, ego-driven, selfish, entitled. All that stuff comes naturally.
Mhm,
You have to learn better.
mhm,
And society has to be structured in such a way that it makes you learn better.
mhm.
We have so much, and it's handed. What's the reason? If somebody can get elected by barefaced lying, what's the incentive to do otherwise?
Mhm. Now, one of the problems is that we don't really know who our leaders and political candidates are. I'm not talking just about political candidates, but the leaders of our movements. We don't really know them. We have an image of them. And so are there things that we can look for when we're just presented with they're presenting us an image, not really who they are?
Yes. Yeah.
Is there anything we can look for?
Well, I outlined those principles in my latest book, Essentials for the Journey. You can judge more by behavior than anything else. Past behavior is the single most reliable predictor of future behavior. And so what you really need to do is look at somebody's behavioral record. Now, I won't mention any names, but we've had some politicians who had real trouble during their campaigns because they were so focused on themselves and their power that they ended up basically abusing even those who were trying to help them get elected.
Mhm.
What makes anybody think that they will behave any differently in office with more power?
Now,
Past behavior is the thing, but you have to know what to look for. You have to know what principles of behavior make for good character. Talk is cheap, as the old adage says. Anybody can say anything, and the one thing that manipulative people know better than anything is what you want to see and what you want to hear and what it is that you need. And all they have to do is say, I will be your champion.
Mhm.
That's all they have to do.
yeah, sometimes the flaws seem obvious, like you say. And I think we have a tendency, and I've said this a number of times, that we can see it's like the biblical passage. You can see the speck in your enemy's eye, but you can't see hold on a second.
You got muted there, Britt.
I'm sorry. You can't, so, candidates can say outrageous things. They like to stir up grievances, and sometimes they're stirring up grievances on us too, that we don't really critically examine what's being said to us. So we can see it how the other side is false, but we can't see the falsehood that's being directed towards us. And so they're stirring up grievances to get attention, to gain power, to rally people. And why do people still vote for them? Why are people attracted to narcissists and abusers like that? Why are people not, making excuses for these people, still supporting, even after, for example, Fox News has been sued for lying? Why is anybody still watching it? Why are people still attracted to Trump? Why is all of this still happening?
Okay, I'm going to get myself in even more trouble here. Because I think that these are the wrong questions to ask. And I think that we tend to look in all the wrong places for the answer. We are the answer. This is the noble experience, the noble experiment of freedom. We are the answer. They are not the answer. They never were the answer. They never will be the answer. I'll just give you a couple of glaring behavioral proofs of that. Many years ago, some maybe well-meaning folks decided it was time to declare war on poverty. And we have chairs in offices, in buildings, with tens of thousands of people honoring the laws passed to end it all and supporting the structures put into place to end it all. That was 40 years ago. Where's the end of it?
Mhm.
There is nothing that we can't do for ourselves better and more effectively and more longer lasting. There's nothing that we can't do better ourselves than any government structure or any promising politician probably can. It all starts with us and our character. So we need not look to what next law we need to pass. We have hundreds of millions of laws on the books. Fact check that.
Mhm. I know that. I'm a lawyer. Yeah.
One more law is not going to fix it. It
Yeah.
starts right here,
Yeah.
right here,
Yeah.
one at a time.
Okay.
And that's what we need to recover. The atmosphere will change as we change.
Mm.
Government hasn't teached a single thing. I worked with the Department of Correction in my state for many years, first as a consultant and then working with some of the most difficult people and assessing them. And it just boggled my mind that of free societies, we have a higher percentage of our population severely restricted in some way, either put away someplace with the key thrown away or in some other restrictive environment than any other free society on the planet ever has. And we have a waiting list a mile long.
Mhm.
Matter of fact, the bed space is so short because there are so many dysfunctional people out there, so many people who basically live the law of the jungle on the streets, that we can't get them in the door fast enough. And you have to do something really egregious. You have to break your probation, violate it for the umpteenth time. In many cases, yes, there are travesties too, but sometimes the numbers don't tell all the story. I was talking just a little bit ago with about this. There are certainly tragic cases where people who don't have the money for a decent attorney, et cetera, get railroaded and are treated unjustly. So there's injustice in the system, no question. But there are also individuals who we know are very, very bad actors. And the only way we've been able to deal with them is to finally maybe get them on a smaller crime. It was Al Capone did many, many things besides evade his taxes.
Mhm.
That's what they were able to get him on, you see. So you can't just look at the statistics and say, oh my goodness, the system is so broken. It's we who are broken. It's the fact that there are so many of us who can't function decently.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Mhm.
Let's take a look at that, and let's take a look at why that's true, despite the fact that we have programs and programs and programs and housing programs. Why are there any? Why? I thought we fixed that. I thought we have it would boggle your mind to know just the budget of the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Yeah.
Why is anybody on the streets?
Yeah.
Government is not going to fix this for us. If it's going to get fixed, we're going to fix it. We're going to take our power back. We're going to take our voice back. we're going to take the responsibility back.
Mhm.
We're going to be that stand-up person.
You know, I do Social Security disability law, and I know that you've worked with in the corrections with probably some very severe abusers. And I sometimes say that sometimes I work with the worst they let out of prison. And but I've always thought, you know, and I think a lot of people still think this, that abuse leads to more abuse, that somehow anybody who abuses a child, for example, was abused themselves, hurt people. You know, but that's not really the case, is it?
No, not always the case at all. As a matter of fact, it's increasingly rarely the case. These days, who hurts people more than anything are entitled, spoiled, selfish, greedy, character deficient people who just simply never grew up. And here's the thing, I say this in all my training workshops. At a moral development level, so many of us today are unfortunately about 4 years old. And the one thing you don't want to do is give the keys to the car to the 4-year-old.
Mhm.
Because first of all, they don't know how to operate it. Even if they don't have evil intent, they're going to wreck it and they might just kill somebody in the process too. And yet, we hand the reins of great power to people who are at a moral development level of a 4-year-old.
Mm.
That's on us. And besides which, there's nothing that government can do for us outside of maybe providing the shield that we need against a foreign attacker.
Mhm.
Nothing that we can't do for ourselves better.
But are there actions that we can take as a community to protect our communities and from the harms? You know, are there things that we can do to maybe like, I guess what we're doing right now is one of those things, you know, to educate people about character disturbance. Are there things that we can do to?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know what? We have the power to show up at that school board meeting and voice our legitimate concern without name calling, without finger pointing, without condemnation, without prejudgment, without already thinking we know the answer before even the questions are asked. We have the power to to approach all of our human enterprises with a right-minded heart, with an open heart. So many times in our political discussions, we think the whole object of having a discussion is to tell the other side how stupid they are, or misguided they are, or how much better things would be if they would just agree with our platform or our view. We're not listening to each other. We're not even taking each other seriously. And I think one begets the other. Whenever there's a push too hard without enough mindfulness in one direction, there's an inevitable push back. In Eastern philosophy, they call that kind of yin and yang. This is a kind of an inevitable kind of thing in life. And we have it within ourselves to be that person who shows up to any encounter with nothing but the right heart. But that's what character is all about.
All right. Very good. One of the things that is sort of controversial on the left is religion, particularly Christianity. Let these two people in here. And we have some types of disinformation being spread about that, as to the role of Christianity and all of that in our society, and the role of religion. Perhaps we've made it so personal and not very public. And I noticed that in your writings has a Christian component. I mean, you titled books, Embracing and Living, the 10 Commandments of Character,
Right.
the Judas Syndrome, and
Right.
In Sheep's Clothing. They're all references to scripture.
Right.
Why is Christianity important to you, and how has it influenced your work?
Oh, gosh. It's because I can't find anything wrong with the character of the person that Christians claim to follow. That's why. And I can't find anything wrong with the way of being and living that that person of character advocated. And it turns my stomach to see people who claim to worship this person behave the way they do. I'll quote somebody, a writer that I really, really love, and a spiritual guide who I really, really love, and he said recently, Jesus never asked anyone to worship him, only to follow his way, only to follow the way of living and being that he was trying to advocate. And I'll be the first to admit that I fail at that, but I don't make any apologies for finding nothing wrong in either his character or his message.
Yeah, I often tell people that a lot of people think that religion should be separate from our political discussions, and yet, loving our neighbor, welcoming the foreigner, treating the foreigner as one native born, or welcoming the stranger, lifting up the lowly, bringing down the powerful, or leaving the rich empty. These are all things that we want people coming into the polling booth with that type of moral development. And in my life, actually, Christianity was a big reason why I chose to work and do Social Security disability. I felt that, I would be building up my treasure in heaven by helping the poor, and the ethical and moral standards that were laid out in scripture that I absorbed were ones that were positive and have made me who I am. Not the perfect character, obviously. I've had my problems, but it's not a struggle between religion, no religion, or no Christianity, or Christianity in politics. It's both sides need to take those values and those beliefs into the polling booth, and we need to confront those, right, like you said, who are using scripture for their own self-aggrandizement or to do evil, and use scripture instead to do good.
Right. And it should be said that there are plenty of people who don't identify as either particularly religious or Christian, that don't profess any faith, who have some pretty decent character, and who live admirable lives. So you don't need to be, like I said, talk is cheap. Talking the talk takes no effort at all. All you have to do is open this orifice and flap your jaws. It's all it takes. Being good is difficult. It involves sacrifice. It takes real love. I believe that's what this person I claim to follow was advocating. I just happen to personally believe that's what it was all about. I believe that's what his life was all about. I take it very seriously, more seriously these days than I've ever taken it. But talk is cheap. It's all in our actions, and we have the power to do it all. Who can stop any one of us from recognizing someone in need and who needs a little bit of help, or who is hungry and needs something to eat? Who can stop any one of us from doing any of that? We've tried turning it over to government, and by the way, the government is spending billions to solve the problems, and they're not solved.
Mhm.
They won't be that way. We have thrown our money away. And what we've done is we've divested ourselves of the burden of good character. That's,
Mhm.
when in basic behavioral psychology, if you want behavior to occur more frequently, you reinforce it. And if you want undesirable behavior to take over, you basically set an environment where it's very possible. And in these days and times, the way we've allowed things to become structured, there's basically no reason to be good.
Yeah.
Who sees the profit in it?
Right.
You know,
Yeah. There's a lot of
I
people. Go ahead.
I can remember when a sports team owner. I guess I'm using a similar example twice, but it's the only thing I can think of at the moment. I can remember when team owners would assess people's talents and would have to make decisions. And when they would make a decision like, you know what, this person has all the talent in the world, but they also have a track record. And there's at least even the possibility that they could bring dishonor to this noble enterprise. And so, you know what, no matter how much talent they have, and no matter how much they could help us win the pennant or the Stanley Cup or this or that, whatever prize it is, I'm sorry, we can't accept them. We need to hold ourselves to a higher standard.
Yeah.
I can remember those days, and I'm not that. I admit I'm old. I'm 75 years old, so I'm there, But I'm not that old that I can't remember a very, very different mindset about character.
Let's take some questions, and I'll go ahead and start looking through the chat. If you want to pose a question or express yourself, there's a raise hand feature. I think it's in the reactions menu. Yeah, in the reactions menu. I'll go ahead and look in the chat to see if there's any questions there. One of the things, while we're waiting for people to raise their hands, or because that's the best way to do it, and so that we can bring you in, put you on the screen, and then have you ask your question or make your comment. That some of these, that some people say narcissism is, and this aggressiveness and this self-centeredness and self-servingness actually, it's for some people, helps them to succeed. There's also a narcissism that is dysfunctional that causes people to be failures, but there's also part of it that makes us successful, I guess.
Yeah, well, the sign of our times, however, is that people are being successful in many ways that the world deems to be all that. People with the most disturbed, most seriously disturbed, malignantly narcissistic character are succeeding in the ways that the world seems to want to define success. So there really are very few incentives left to be decent. Now, I've seen in the chat some people talking about the fact that they have not needed to be particularly coached in being decent, that it seems natural. Folks who have some natural personality trait endowments, like a high capacity for empathy, so to speak, and for the trait that confers upon us a high degree of conscientiousness. Folks who have been endowed with those traits naturally seem to fairly naturally evolve a decency of character without that much coaching. But that's not true for everybody. Some of us need a lot of coaching to be a good character. So what we have to stop doing is we have to stop saying to ourselves, well, this is the way I am, so why can't everybody be like that? We tend to want to overgeneralize based on our own experience, and it's our ego talking. What our ego says is, see, I know the answer. I know how it should be. When there's not really the humility to admit that there's just so much we don't. And if we don't honestly reckon and humbly reckon with ourselves, about ourselves, and with each other, about each other, we might not make it. And we might not be destined to make it. There's a huge universe out there outside of us. Where the James Webb telescope is telling us that even what we thought we knew with the Hubble is just a pittance of how many worlds there are out there. You know, we might be just one of those evolutions that is destined to be on the ash heap of evolutionary history. So if we want to make it,
Yeah.
we need to get humbly honest with ourselves, about ourselves, and with each other, about each other. Get to know, really know who we are, what we're capable of, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then we might just have a chance.
So let's bring Peter in. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Peter.
Hi.
Hello, Peter. Thank you for being on the show.
Oh gosh, thanks for doing this. It's obviously a great deal of difficulty. I was wondering what you think of Robert Hare and his views on political psychopaths.
You know, I don't know that much about his views. I think, unfortunately, the terms that we use today, they have been bandied about a bit loosely.
Mm.
For example, psychopaths, sociopaths, they've lost their original meanings. But I do think that we have more and more severely disturbed characters gravitating toward politics because of what it offers in the way of power and money, mostly power. People of and the heart of psychopathy is predatory capacity. We are the only species that has within our population individuals who want to prey on their own kind. No other species does that. Psychopaths are nature's only known intra-species predators. And so folks like that naturally gravitate toward power. They seek it ravenously. They seek it for its own sake, and you can count on them to abuse it when they get it, which is why it's on us to never afford it. And there are some telltale signs about these kinds of folks. There are some telltale signs. I can remember, I say, I just don't want to get personal or perhaps offend, but I'm going to do this. I can remember in the early days of the Trump campaign, at some rallies, folks witnessing some stuff coming out of his mouth and some nonverbal behavior, and you could hear the gasps. You could see people turning to one another and saying, my God, did he just really do that? Did he just really say that? Oh my God. And yet by the end, they were applauding and championing. That's on us. You can't blame the psychopath for trying when he's got such a willing prey.
Go ahead, Peter.
The thing I noticed about Trump is that he never stops talking. He has a low, monotonous kind of just a rant, just kind of a little rant that he goes constantly. When he's making a speech, he never pauses for anybody to ever reflect or anything. He just keeps talking. He's actually kind of hypnotizing people. That's what I think.
That's exactly right. Folks, folks who have, the thing about it, here it is. I think the more dangerous type than Trump, and he's dangerous because of his lack of capacity to care,
Popularity.
and his complete fixation on as much power as he can get. He's dangerous. But what I think is even more dangerous is the mesmerizing power that true charmers have. The ones who appear enlightened and who appear genuinely to have your best interest at heart. I think they're even more dangerous because we are so willing to turn ourselves over. We're so willing.
Okay.
Without making them prove their character.
Thank you, Peter.
Oh, thank you.
Now let's have Jeff. I saw some questions in the chat that I'd like to get to. Jeff, I think you just came in, right? Have you been here for the whole show? You want to go ahead and unmute yourself. You don't want to ask a question? You have to unmute yourself.
Oh,
Okay.
did I?
Now I can hear you now.
I was just gonna say, are you guys gonna keep talking about Trump? The guy doesn't even have an office right now. He's not even in power.
Oh, Lord.
Well, we're talking about Trump as an example. What we're looking at, not so
Okay.
much about that. Yeah. So thank you very much. Now we have
And that's why I said I hated to even use the example.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this Eric asked, is our behavior the result of our genes? And I know one of the things you said in your book is that we have gifts that and you talked about some people who are maybe more naturally good than other people. And
some folks have an endowed capacity for greater empathy. We know this. We know, unfortunately, that a lot more things are conferred with the DNA than we thought. And empathy capacity is one of those things. So when you have somebody that has high empathy capacity, you don't have to put as much energy into developing that empathy in them because they have a natural high empathy capacity. Now, there are those individuals, especially folks tending to be psychopathic, who lack not only the capacity, but may be absent the capacity altogether. And for them, the research suggests that you can try to teach it all day long, and they're not going to learn it. As a matter of fact, they might even become better predators. And some folks have a natural endowment to be more conscientious. They develop what we call their moral conscientiousness or social awareness more easily. It comes more naturally to them. For some of us, it takes a lot longer, and it takes learning a whole lot more lessons to develop that level of social awareness and care. So things aren't so simple, and we're all individuals. But what we're witnessing right now is that most of the people who probably shouldn't have power do. And that's why the gap among us is widening in so many areas between rich and poor, haves and have-nots, those with power and those without. The gap is widening. And if anything, the best times this country has enjoyed have been the times when the greatest thriving was not at either extreme. It was in the middle, where there was so much, not just economic prosperity, but prosperity in a lot of other ways for the greatest number of folks. Those were our best times. And unfortunately, right now, they're bygone times.
You know, sometimes, and Tricia is asking a question here in the chat, and I just wanted that. Sometimes I look at pictures of criminals, you get these criminal stories, and I look at their eyes, I look at their expression, I look at their face, and I imagine that I'm seeing things. There's talk about the psychopathic stare or sociopathic stare. Tricia asks, is there an observable body language that would reveal a character disturbance?
Yeah, I wish it were that simple. Gavin de Becker wrote the landmark book, The Gift of Fear. And he talked about this hair on the back of your neck kind of raising experience that many of us who have the gift, it's a gift, it's an intuition. When you have that gift and you sense that there's a predator in your midst. I had a personal experience with this once doing a workshop over in Greece, a workshop that I was attending. And I knew that I was in the presence of somebody who had probably done some really awful things, because this person made the hair on the back of my neck stand up just being in their presence. It wasn't just the look, it was the energy coming from the person. And then later found out some truths that proved that uneasiness was warranted because there was a behavioral history to go along with it. But it's not always that clear. And when you talk about the eyes and the and the gaze, boy. What I found in my work is that that's not a reliable indicator, because the eyes can reveal interest, but they can't reveal regard. And there are a lot of reasons why somebody can be interested in you, and there are a lot of reasons why somebody can find value in you. And so just because they look upon you favorably does not mean that they will treat you or anybody else favorably.
Yeah, some of them are charming, and like cult leaders can be very charming and very deceptive.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And some are some just are bizarre, and sometimes those photos that are in the news are often the photo they took at the jail, and I can see things in there, but I often think that maybe I'm just seeing arrogance in their eyes or something like that.
Yeah, in psychology, within the realm of what we call neuro-linguistic programming, there's an axiom that you can't not communicate. And we human beings are creatures of communication, but about 90% of our communication is nonverbal. So we're always saying something with our body posture, with our movements, with our facial expressions, with how we respond to the actions of a crowd, and how we follow up and how we capitalize, what we call micro behaviors. So one of the things, as a therapist, this is one thing that I learned very early on, in the difference between dealing with just a troubled person who really just needed some help and support, and a character impaired person who needed a whole lot of different things than that. One of the things I learned is they trained us in psychology to be good listeners. But when it comes to artists of impression management, you can't listen. If you start listening, they will hook you. They will hook you. You need to do much more observing.
Mm.
Observing all the little micro behaviors, and especially how they relate to others, including how they relate to you. You want to make your judgments based on behavior, not on color.
So it looks like we're running out of questions, but one more thing here. There's the story of the crowds calling for Jesus's execution. And sometimes there's this idea that there's sort of a mob behavior of groups of people, that individually people might not do certain things, but when they're part of a large group or a large crowd, they get caught up in the whatever it is, and they do terrible things.
Yeah, well, I wasn't there, and we only have the fourth and fifth hand accounts of people who said that somebody said that somebody said that somebody said what happened. So I only know one truth about that whole scenario, and that is this. And I think people like Martin Luther King demonstrated this in the 20th century. People of really, really, really good character in our culture, in our times, in our broken world, they get crucified. That's the only truth I know.
Wow. We have one more question. It looks like Elizabeth. Let me add you to the spotlight here. Go ahead and unmute. I know you wanted to ask your question earlier.
Well, it's not so much a question, but two observations. I don't know about empathy being inborn or not, but I do know from working with children, I'm also a licensed psychologist, children in foster care who've had a really rotten beginning, abuse, neglect. How can they develop empathy?
Oh my goodness.
Unless you receive empathy, you can't develop empathy. If you don't have anything to eat, it's hard to feel sorry for somebody else who doesn't have anything to eat. But the other thing is, I had hoped that this meeting was going to talk to something about what we might do to wake up I hate the word, even a non-word, MAGA crew, to see what they're supporting that's not in their best interest. Because I do think the majority of Americans are good people. Maybe not great people, we all have our flaws. But to help these people who are so deluded that they think this, I call him the former squatter in the White House, is going to ever do anything for them.
Yeah. If you don't mind, and I really appreciate what you said there about developing empathy, especially in those who really have been set back on their path by their unfortunate circumstances. But as therapists, I'm going to say from personal experience, and this is something I just drill into all my professional training workshops. We were trained to help people who didn't see to see. And that's not the problem of our time. We have people who see but disagree. So wasting our time and energy trying to get them to see differently is an exercise in futility. And besides which, there's a great axiom that I truly believe in, and that is, it's a lot more efficacious, as a psychologist, you understand that term. It's a lot more efficacious to act your way into a new way of thinking than it is to think your way into a new way of acting. So what needs to change is not so much our thinking, that will change, and our hearts will change along with it. But what needs to change is our behavior, and where we have power is starting right here. We lead by example. We stop looking there and we start looking here. and we start doing more. We do the loving. We do the loving we expect, and more of it. And it catches. It's catchy. Really noble behavior is catchy. It's like a magnet. We're looking in all the wrong places. We're not going to change anybody's mind. We're not. Therapists make this mistake in the therapy room too. We think we're going to be that person who puts things so succinctly, so beautifully, so poetically that they say, oh my goodness, I never even thought of that before. Oh, my whole life is different. And it was those words that changed my whole life. That rarely ever happens. And I think it's a misdirection of time and energy. We have an incredible power to make all the changes we want ourselves.
Now, there's one thing, and I really want to appreciate having another psychologist come on and make a comment that really helps elevate the discussion. One of the things you said in your book, though, is that these people need not empathy, but confrontation and a change in their thinking. So how does that relate to what you just said?
Well, the change, we know that what a person thinks about something and their frame of mind, their attitudes, we know that influences behavior. We know that. But the way to get the change of thinking is through the change in behavior. And that's where the art of what I talk about in my books, the art of benign confrontation, comes into play. I know hundreds of people, they contact me every day, who have experienced this phenomenon we call therapy-induced trauma. They went for help. They managed to cajole their character-disturbed relationship partner into a session or two. And then the person is so good at the art of impression management and dodging issues and doing this, especially the positive impression management, that the aggrieved party feels bad all over again. And not only that, if the counselor adopts a kind of a systems approach where they see everybody as having an equal role in maintaining the dysfunction, they feel even worse. So one of the things that's absolutely necessary is in the encounter, in the here and now, if change is ever going to take place, it takes place in the here and now. Once you begin to set what I call the terms of engagement, the rules of operation, and once you encourage more pro-social behavior and discourage less antisocial behavior in the here and now, that's when attitudes slowly, incrementally have a prayer of changing. That's when the thinking starts to get, when you interrupt that excuse as it's being made, and it becomes clear that that isn't going to fly. You don't have to say, oh, you're making an excuse. You need not do that. They already know that. But when you interrupt it and you reinforce otherwise, then things begin to change, including the thinking. So it's not that I'm contradicting myself. The thinking and the attitudes do need to change. The question is how? How does that happen? And it starts with behavior. It doesn't end with behavior. The thinking doesn't change first, and then the behavior changes. It's the vice versa.
Behavior changes and then thinking changes.
That's right.
Now, one of the things that,
Which is why all sages throughout time, whether they've been in religious traditions or not, have always had behavioral advice to give. It's always been about do this, take the time, know your body, practice meditation, whatever. It's all about the behavior first. The mind becomes expanded. The heart begins to open. You do, and then it happens. I wish I could visit with every therapist on the planet to get that through. Because we waste so much time and energy. trying to get people to see what they already see.
I have a response to Elizabeth's questions, which we're talking about a little bit next meeting, but we know that the mega group or the right is being manipulated by false propaganda and lies and all of that. But I think it might be a little naive to think that we are not also being manipulated by falsehoods, lies, attempts to rile us up, divisive tactics, profiteering, political entrepreneurism. And part of what we need to do is recognize, because I think we contribute to the problem and religion might be an example. It's pro-Christianity or anti-Christianity, or no Christianity in politics, or yes to Christianity in politics. I think is a false choice that we're being fed, and we're being fed misinformation about the Constitution and the separation of church and state, so that we end up with people who think you're against Christianity. But we could be totally Christian and use scripture and correct those people. I tell people, they use scripture inappropriately. And what we need to do is correct them, not to say, no, stop using Christianity. That just contributes to the division. Do you have something to say on that, Elizabeth?
Yes, I can't stand that phrase, particularly Christian nationalists. They're not Christian and they're not nationalist. That's it.
Right. But what does
they've usurped the term Christian, and they're not Christian. I was brought up Episcopalian, and the things that I hear now are not Christian, as George said earlier, or you did. I don't know.
I did. And I'll say a respectful amen to that.
The Good Samaritan, and
Right.
Well, anyway, that's it. I just can't stand that phrase anymore. So.
Right.
I'll say amen to that.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Christian nationalism is, what is it? Is it
It's
something?
it's an oxymoron is what it is.
Yeah. But does it mean that we shouldn't have Christianity in politics? Because I think that's what a lot of it takes.
Well,
It's
I wish we had
political personal religion. Go ahead, George.
I wish we had some Christianity in politics. I'd like to find some somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't see
Abraham-
any. Talk is cheap. I don't see any loving behavior.
Yeah.
Where do you see it?
Well, I know Abraham Lincoln used scripture, and a lot of our politicians do, and sometimes we use scripture without even knowing it. But if we can have people love their neighbor, welcome the stranger, treat the foreigner as one native born, lift up the lowly, send the rich away empty, then maybe we can have a more just, humble, and merciful world.
That's in the behavior. That's in the behavior. Welcome the refugee. Treat, tend to the needs of the poor. Work for injustice. Address injustice. Work for justice. That's in the behavior, and that's when the mindset changes. That's when everything changes. It's all about the behavior. And
Peter has, go ahead. Peter has a question. One last question. That's it. Let's bring Peter.
Not so much a question. I was just going to say, since you mentioned it, Jimmy Carter is a perfect template for what happens if you're a real Christian in politics. He got deep sixed. He was, the business with the Iran-Contra and the hostages and all, they did him in with treachery. But he tried to actually practice Christianity as a president. I'd never seen anybody do that before, and maybe not since. His failure sort of was very informative.
I think Barack Obama did.
He might have, maybe he was 2.0.
Yeah.
Okay, that was my comment. Sorry.
All right. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you all.
You're welcome. Thank you, Dr. Simon, so much for coming and doing
You're
this. Yeah. And
I know I rant and rave from time to time. I get on my soapbox.
Well, that's what we need, because we put the soapbox there for you. Thank you, everybody. And look forward to our new event. Remember our next event, register at tinyurl.com Facebook.com/America Not Racism. And for our next event, and look for our emails, and have a wonderful day today. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, everybody. Bye.